You know those nights when everything seems peaceful and nothing out of the ordinary is expected? The kind of night where you're unwinding from a long day and then your husband drops an idea so absurd that you question his sanity? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. Welcome to the channel Infidelity Stories. There I was, finally relaxing on the couch after a long day at work, when my husband, Michael, turned to me with that look he gets when he's about to suggest something unusual. "Love, I've been thinking," he began. I raised an eyebrow, bracing myself for whatever wild idea was brewing in his head. Oh no, I thought. Here we go again. You ever thought about what it would be like to cheat on me, but with my permission? I almost spat out the wine I was sipping. I stared at him, expecting him to burst into laughter at the absurdity of what he just said. But no, Michael was serious. Dead serious. "You're kidding, right?" I asked, searching his face for any sign of a joke. "Nope, I'm being serious. I want to know how it feels, to experience betrayal, but in a controlled way, something we both understand and agree to." I blinked, trying to process what I had just heard. "So let me get this straight," I began slowly. "You want me to cheat on you, but with your full knowledge and approval. How is that supposed to make sense?" "That's exactly it, Anna. I want you to do it. With my permission, my encouragement even. I think it could be good for us, spice things up, take our relationship to a new level of trust." I sat there, utterly dumbfounded. Was he seriously suggesting that I have an affair for the sake of our relationship? Was this a test? I was half expecting some kind of hidden camera to pop out, revealing it was all some elaborate prank. "But no," he continued, his eyes gleaming with enthusiasm, as though he had just proposed the most groundbreaking idea of the century. "Michael, you really want me to cheat on you, like for real?" I asked, still not quite believing what was unfolding. "Yeah, Anna, that's exactly what I'm saying. I want to experience it, but in a way that's safe for both of us. It could even be fun for you too." I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or walk out of the room. Fun for me? Since when was infidelity a fun concept? This wasn't some casual Wednesday night conversation about picking up groceries. It was about me betraying my husband with his full blessing. Still, there was something about the way he said it, the confidence in his voice, that made me pause. I couldn't help but feel intrigued. Was this just exhaustion talking, or was there a kernel of, "No, I'm open to it, no rush, no pressure"? With that, the conversation ended, but the thought lingered in my mind. The days that followed were strange. Michael seemed excited, almost anxious for me to decide. The way he spoke about it, the way his eyes lit up, you'd think this was some lifelong dream he was finally on the verge of realizing. And then, one evening, he came up with a new idea. "How about we do it at a barbecue, with some of our closest friends? It'll be casual, relaxed, and if anything happens, it happens naturally." I stared at him. "A barbecue, Michael? Seriously? You want me to cheat on you in the middle of a social gathering while grilling steaks? Have you completely lost it?" He shrugged. "Why not? Everyone's relaxed, having a good time. No one will suspect a thing." Something more in what he was saying? "Look, Michael," I started, "I'm not sure if you've realized, but this is beyond weird. You want me to cheat on you, but you're cool with it. Do you really expect me to just flip a switch and be ready for something like that?" "I'm not asking you to do anything you're not comfortable with," he reassured me. "I just think it's worth exploring. Who knows, it could make us even stronger." Part of me wanted to laugh it off, dismiss it as one of his harebrained schemes, but another part of me, maybe the part that was curious, or maybe the part that was just too tired to argue, began to consider it. What if? What if this strange idea had some merit? Maybe, just maybe, there was something to what he was saying. "Okay, Michael," I sighed. "I'll think about it, but that doesn't mean I'm going out tomorrow and finding some other man to, Of course, love. I just wanted to let you." I couldn't believe I was hearing this. A barbecue. As if that were the most natural setting for an affair. Yet, in some bizarre way, Michael was convinced that this was the perfect plan. And what was worse, I was starting to be convinced too. Fine, I said, almost against my better judgment. We'll have the barbecue, but just so we're clear, I'm not saying anything's going to happen. Of course, love, no expectations. And so, somehow, I found myself organizing a barbecue where the unspoken goal was, well, for me to betray my husband. The day of the barbecue arrived. As I got dressed, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation. What exactly was I preparing for? I chose a dress that made me feel confident, but not too obvious. After all, everything was supposed to happen naturally, right? When our friends arrived, the atmosphere was light, casual. Drinks were poured, food was grilled, laughter filled the air. For a while, I almost forgot the bizarre premise of the event. Almost. But then I started noticing the subtle cues from Michael. The way he would make little remarks to our friends like, "Whoever catches Anna's eye tonight will definitely have my respect." Everyone laughed, thinking it was just a joke. But I knew better. Carlos, one of Michael's oldest friends, had been eyeing me throughout the afternoon. As the evening went on, he found an excuse to join me in the kitchen. His tone was casual, but there was a new intensity in his gaze. "You seem different tonight, Anna," he said, leaning in slightly. I chuckled awkwardly. "Oh, just enjoying the night, I guess." Carlos smiled, but it wasn't his usual friendly smile. There was something more behind it, and before I knew it, he leaned in and kissed me. It was quick, almost impulsive, but enough to send a shock through my system. And that's when I realized I was actually doing this. When we returned to the group, the air seemed heavier. There was a tension, an unspoken understanding of what was beginning to unfold. Michael, sitting across the yard, watched us with a small, satisfied smile. Another friend, John, caught the vibe and began flirting more openly with me too. What happened next was a whirlwind of sensations. One moment, I was surrounded by friends, laughing and talking, and the next, I found myself the center of attention in a way I never imagined. Carlos and John, both vying for my attention, while Michael observed with quiet approval. Eventually, the gathering moved inside. The lights dimmed, the atmosphere grew more intimate, and before I knew it, I was crossing a line I never thought I would cross. But the strangest part of all, I wasn't filled with guilt. Instead, there was a sense of liberation, of discovery. Michael, always the calm observer, seemed pleased, as though this had been his plan all along. Afterward, he simply held me close, a silent understanding passing between us. So, there it was. What started as an absurd proposition turned into something that changed our relationship in ways I never expected. Where would this lead us? I had no idea. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a strange sense of connection with Michael, as if we had discovered something entirely new about ourselves. Only time would tell what would come next. In the days following the barbecue, things between Michael and me were oddly peaceful. You'd think that crossing such an intense line would leave behind chaos, guilt, or at least a sense of discomfort. But instead we found ourselves closer, as if something unspoken had strengthened the bond between us. Michael, of course, was thrilled. "Anna, I can't stop thinking about how amazing that night was," he confessed one evening as we were lying in bed. He turned to face me, his eyes full of excitement. I knew it would be good for us, but I didn't expect it to feel so right. Didn't you feel that too? I didn't know how to respond. There was a part of me that agreed with him. Things had felt surprisingly natural, like it was something we'd been waiting to explore without even realizing it. But another part of me still felt unsettled. Not because of what we'd done, but because of what it might mean moving forward. "I don't know, Michael," I finally said, turning to look at him. "It was intense, yes. But is this really something we can keep doing? I mean, what's the next step? Are we just going to invite our friends over every few weeks for some kind of experience?" He smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. "I don't know if it needs to be that structured, but I do think it's something we could explore more. Maybe not all the time, but when the moment feels right. You felt it, Anna. I know you did. And the truth was, I had. As strange as it was, there had been something undeniably freeing about the whole thing. But the question lingered in my mind. How far were we willing to take this? As the weeks passed, the memory of that night didn't fade like I thought it would. Instead, it hung in the air between us, a constant reminder of what we had shared. Michael seemed eager for a repeat, but he was careful not to push. I appreciated that, even though I could sense his anticipation growing with each passing day. Then, one Friday evening, he casually mentioned having some friends over again. Nothing too big, he said. Just a small dinner, maybe the same group as last time. You know, keep it intimate. I knew what he meant by intimate. It wasn't just about having a casual meal. It was about seeing if the energy of that night could be recreated, or maybe even intensified. And a part of me was curious too. Could we handle doing this again? Was this becoming part of our new normal? All right, I agreed, after a moment's hesitation. But we take it slow. No expectations, no pressure. Let's just see how things go. Michael beamed, as if I had just agreed to the best idea ever. He wasted no time reaching out to our friends. Soon enough, the dinner was set, and I found myself planning for another night that could change everything again. The night of the dinner arrived, and this time the atmosphere was different from the start. Everyone seemed to know on some level that this wasn't just an ordinary gathering. There was an underlying tension, a kind of charged excitement that hummed beneath the surface of every conversation. Carlos and John arrived together, each giving me a look that felt more loaded than a simple greeting. I felt my pulse quicken as I realized that once again, I was the center of attention in a way that was both thrilling and unnerving. As the evening progressed, the tension grew. Michael was the perfect host, pouring drinks, keeping the conversation light, but I could see it in his eyes. He was waiting for the shift, the moment when things would move beyond the surface and into the uncharted territory we had explored before. It didn't take long. After dinner, as we sat around in the living room, the conversation turned more flirtatious. Carlos, always the bold one, was the first to make a move. He leaned in, his voice low and smooth as he murmured something that made my heart race. I glanced at Michael, expecting to see some flicker of jealousy, but instead he gave me a small nod, his silent approval. That was all it took. Soon, Carlos was by my side, his hand brushing against mine in a way that sent shivers down my spine. John wasn't far behind, his presence unmistakable as he found his way into the mix. The night quickly became a repeat of what had happened at the barbecue, but with a new level of intensity. Michael watched just as he had before, but this time there was something different in his expression. It wasn't just satisfaction, it was desire, pure and raw. He was no longer just the observer, he was part of this in his own way. As things escalated, I found myself caught in the whirlwind once again. The feeling of being desired by more than one man, with Michael's full support, was intoxicating. And just like before, the boundaries we thought existed melted away, replaced by something primal, something we didn't fully understand but were eager to explore. At some point, the group moved to the bedroom. The air was thick with tension, and I realized that this was no longer just about experimentation. This was becoming something more. A lifestyle maybe, or at least a new aspect of our relationship that we were diving into head first. As I lay there, surrounded by the weight of the moment, I caught Michael's eye. He smiled at me, not just the smile of a man watching his fantasy unfold, but the smile of someone who had found something deeper in the chaos. I smiled back, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. And that's when I knew, this wasn't just a phase. This was who we were now. The days that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. Michael and I were closer than we had ever been. We talked more, laughed more, and even though we had just crossed into uncharted territory, our relationship felt solid, unbreakable even. But with this new dynamic came new questions. How often would we do this? Where did it end? And most importantly, what was next for us as a couple? Michael, ever the optimist, seemed unfazed by these questions. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said. "There's no rush, no pressure. We're in control." But was that really true? Could we control something that had already taken on a life of its own? As I pondered these questions, I realized that, for better or worse, we had crossed a line we could never uncross. And whether it led to something beautiful or something destructive was no longer up to me alone. It was up to both of us, and the choices we would make from here on out. In the weeks following that second night, things between Michael and I felt more intense and layered than ever before. We found ourselves in uncharted waters, navigating a new kind of relationship dynamic that, in many ways, felt exhilarating, but also confusing. The silence of our home now buzzed with a kind of electricity, an anticipation that never seemed to fully fade. I would catch Michael looking at me with that knowing smile, as if he were constantly replaying the events of those evenings in his mind, savouring them. And truthfully, I was too. But with this new intensity came questions that lingered, questions I didn't know how to voice. How far could we take this? Where would we draw the line if there even was one? Would we eventually push things too far? One evening, as we were finishing dinner, I decided it was time to ask. "Michael," I started slowly, placing my fork down, "what exactly are we doing here?" He looked up from his plate, surprised by the sudden seriousness in my voice. "What do you mean, love?" I paused, unsure of how to phrase it. "I mean, these nights. This lifestyle we're starting to fall into. Where is this going?" Michael leaned back in his chair, considering my words. "I don't think it needs to go anywhere specific. We're just exploring, learning more about ourselves and each other. And if it feels good, if it brings us closer, then isn't that enough?" His answer was calm, rational, and it should have been reassuring. But part of me felt like there was more beneath the surface, something unspoken. "And you're okay with all of this?" I asked, searching his face for any hint of doubt. "I mean, really okay? Watching me with other men? Is this really what you want?" Michael didn't hesitate. "I want us to be happy, Anna, and I am okay with it. In fact, it excites me. It's not just about watching you with someone else. It's about seeing you in a new light, seeing us in a new light. We're not stuck in the same old routine. We're free. Free." The word echoed in my mind. It sounded liberating but also daunting. Could I really live like this, in this constant state of emotional and sexual experimentation? Could we handle the weight of what we were doing to ourselves? Michael reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "I know it's different and maybe a little scary, but we don't have to rush. We can take it one step at a time. If it ever feels like too much, we stop. I promise." I nodded, though my mind was still racing. Part of me wanted to believe him, that we could control this, that we could stop whenever we wanted. But the other part of me knew that once you open certain doors, they're not so easily closed again. That weekend, Michael proposed another gathering, this time smaller, more intimate, just us and one couple, Carlos and his wife, Sarah. It caught me off guard. "Sarah?" I asked, trying to hide the surprise in my voice. "Does she know about everything?" Michael shrugged, a casual confidence in his voice. "I think she has a good idea. Carlos said she's open-minded. I thought maybe it would be nice to change things up, explore something new." There it was again, this constant push toward the unknown. And yet, something about the idea of including Sarah intrigued me. It would add a new layer to what we were doing, a different dynamic. I was curious, even though I wasn't entirely sure what to expect. "All right," I agreed, after a moment's hesitation. "But let's keep it low-key. I don't want things to get too complicated." Michael smiled, clearly excited by my willingness to keep going. "Of course, just a simple dinner with friends." When the night arrived, I felt a familiar mix of nerves and excitement. Carlos and Sarah arrived right on time, both looking relaxed, as though this was just another Saturday evening. Sarah in particular seemed perfectly at ease. She was beautiful in that effortlessly elegant way, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. I couldn't help but wonder what Carlos had told her about us, and about what had happened before. As we sat down for dinner, the conversation flowed easily, laughter filling the air. But beneath the casual chit-chat, I could feel something else simmering. There was a tension, an awareness of what could happen later. And with Sarah in the mix, it was impossible to ignore the possibilities. It was during dessert, after a few glasses of wine had loosened everyone up, that the conversation took a turn. "So, Carlos tells me you guys have been experimenting," Sarah said, her tone light but suggestive. Her eyes flickered between Michael and me, a small smile playing on her lips. I swallowed, unsure how to respond. But Michael, ever the confident one, jumped in. "We've been exploring some new things, yeah?" he said, glancing at me with a smile. "It's been exciting, to say the least." Sarah raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "And how does that work? I mean, what exactly have you been exploring?" Carlos shifted in his seat, glancing at Sarah with a grin. "Let's just say Anna and Michael have been having some fun, and I've been lucky enough to be part of it." My cheeks flushed at the directness of his words, but I couldn't deny the thrill that shot through me. Sarah, for her part, didn't seem shocked. In fact, she looked interested. "Fun, huh?" she mused, taking a sip of her wine. "That sounds intriguing." There was a pause, a brief moment of silence where everyone seemed to be sizing up the situation. Then Sarah leaned back in her chair, her eyes locked on mine. "Would you like me to join in on the fun?" Her question hung in the air, and I felt the room shift. My heart raced as I tried to process what she was suggesting. I glanced at Michael, who was watching me carefully, his eyes full of anticipation. This was a new level, a new step, and I realized that whatever I said next would determine the course of the night. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. Did I want this? Was I ready for another step deeper into this strange, exciting world we were creating? "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I think I would." And just like that, the night took on a new energy, a palpable electricity that charged the air around us. Sarah smiled, and for the first time that evening, I saw a glimmer of something deeper in her. Eyes, curiosity, excitement, and maybe even a hint of desire. Carlos and Michael exchanged a glance, and without a word, the four of us moved from the dining room to the living room, the atmosphere shifting from casual conversation to something far more intimate. As the night unfolded, I realized that this wasn't just about Michael's fantasy anymore. This was about both of us, about discovering what we wanted, what we could handle, and how far we were willing to go. Sarah's presence added a new layer to everything, making it both more complicated and more thrilling. By the end of the night, I felt like I had crossed yet another line, one I hadn't even known existed. And as Michael held me close in the quiet aftermath, I couldn't help but wonder how many more lines we would cross and what it would mean for us in the long run. But one thing was certain, whatever this was, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning after that night with Carlos and Sarah, everything felt different. Not in a bad way, just heavier, more complex. The weight of what we were doing, the choices we were making, settled over me like a fog. I lay in bed beside Michael, who was still sleeping soundly, a small smile on his face as though he were replaying the events in his dreams. For him, it seemed simple, but for me, questions kept swirling in my mind. Where was this going? Could our relationship truly handle this? And what about Sarah? Was this just a one-time thing, or had we opened a door that could never be closed? As I quietly slipped out of bed, making my way to the kitchen for some coffee, I replayed the night in my head. Sarah had been a surprise. Her confidence, the way she effortlessly fit into what we were doing, had both thrilled and unsettled me. It wasn't jealousy, exactly. More like uncertainty. Was she now part of this? Would she want to come back? And how did Carlos feel about it? Michael appeared in the kitchen a few moments later, his hair tousled, still looking satisfied and relaxed. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching me. "So," he said, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "What did you think?" I took a sip of my coffee, trying to gather my thoughts. "It was intense." He nodded, clearly expecting that answer. "Intense good or intense bad?" I hesitated. "Both, I guess. It was exciting, no doubt about that, but also complicated." Michael frowned slightly. "Complicated how?" "I don't know," I said honestly, setting my cup down. "It's just, this was different. With Sarah there, it felt like we crossed another line. A line I wasn't sure we were ready for." He nodded slowly, considering my words. "But you liked it, right? I mean, I saw the way you and Sarah were together. There was something there." I couldn't deny it. There had been a spark between Sarah and me, something I hadn't expected, but that didn't make it any less confusing. "I did," I admitted, "but that doesn't mean I'm not worried. This thing we're doing, it feels like it's growing, evolving, and I'm not sure where it ends." Michael set his cup down and crossed the room to me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Anna, we're in control here. We decide what happens next. If it ever feels like too much, we stop. I don't want to push you into anything you're not comfortable with." I leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his body against mine. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could stop whenever we wanted, that we were the ones driving this. But deep down, I knew that once you step onto a path like this, it's hard to turn back. Over the next few weeks, Michael and I didn't discuss the Sarah and Carlos night in detail. But the tension, the excitement, was always there, like a current running just beneath the surface. Michael would bring it up occasionally, casually mentioning how great it had been, how much he enjoyed seeing me explore that side of myself. And each time, I would nod, trying to sort out my own feelings. And then, one day, out of the blue, Michael proposed something new. "I've been thinking," he said one evening as we were sitting on the couch, "about Sarah and Carlos. I think they're interested in continuing things with us." I raised an eyebrow. "Continuing?" "Yeah," Michael said, leaning forward, excitement in his voice. "You know, having them over again. Maybe just the four of us, seeing where it goes." My heart skipped a beat. The last time had been intense, yes, but could we really do it again? Was I ready for that? "Michael, are you sure this is a good idea? I mean, Sarah and I, that was new territory. What if things get complicated between them, or between us?" He took my hand, his eyes searching mine. "Anna, we're doing this together. If at any point it feels wrong, we stop. But I've talked to Carlos and he said Sarah is open to it. She enjoyed the last time just like we did. They're both on the same page as us." I sighed, running my fingers through my hair. There was a part of me that was curious, that wanted to explore further, but another part of me was terrified. What if this was the point where everything fell apart? "Let me think about it," I finally said. Michael nodded, clearly respecting my need for time, but I could see the eagerness in his eyes, the anticipation that was building. A few days later, I gave him my answer. "Okay," I said one evening as we were lying in bed. "Let's invite them over, but let's keep it open-ended, no expectations. I just want to see how things feel." Michael smiled, pulling me close. "I knew you'd come around. This is going to be amazing." And so the date was set. Carlos and Sarah would come over for dinner the following weekend, and whatever happened next would be up to us. The night of the dinner arrived quickly. As I got ready, I felt the familiar mix of excitement and anxiety bubbling up inside me. I chose a simple dress, not too revealing, but still flattering. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard, even though I knew exactly what was at stake. When Carlos and Sarah arrived, the atmosphere was instantly different from the last time. Sarah seemed more relaxed, more comfortable, as though she knew exactly what the night held in store. And Carlos? Well, Carlos had that same easy charm he always had, but there was something more in his eyes, a a hunger perhaps, or maybe just anticipation. Dinner was casual, with plenty of laughter and wine flowing, but underneath it all, the tension was undeniable. We all knew why we were there, even if no one was saying it out loud. After dinner, as we moved to the living room, the conversation became more playful, more flirtatious. Sarah was sitting close to me on the couch, her hand casually resting on my leg as we talked. Michael and Carlos were across from us, watching with interest. It was Sarah who made the first move, leaning in and whispering something in my ear that sent shivers down my spine. I glanced at Michael, who gave me a small nod, his eyes full of approval. And just like that, the night took off. Sarah and I became the center of attention, and as things escalated, it was clear that this was no longer just an experiment. This was a lifestyle, a new chapter in our relationship that we were both eager to explore. As the night unfolded, I realized that whatever doubts I had before were fading. This wasn't about losing control. It was about embracing something new, something raw and exciting. And when the night finally ended, as we lay in bed together, exhausted but content, I looked over at Michael and smiled. Maybe this wasn't what I had ever imagined for us. But in a strange, exhilarating way, it felt right. We were pushing boundaries, yes, but we were doing it together. And for now, that was enough. But I knew deep down that this was just the beginning. There would be more nights like this, more boundaries to push, more lines to cross. And the question that lingered in my mind was not if we would go further, but how far we were willing to go. Before you leave, remember to subscribe to the channel by activating the Tinkerbell to receive notification every time.